Now let's go back over to Japan to Eoin Sheahan. Eoin, how are you keeping?
I'm well, Johnny. What's the crack?
I couldn't help but think of you in that press conference there. I think it was Gary Ringrose started talking about sushi, and you must have been well in your element when the old culinary stuff came up. You've certainly excelled at this tournament in that regard.
It's like kindred spirits, Johnny. Just two great chefs, really, two great tastes, really going toe to toe in a press conference. You love to see it.
You absolutely love to see it. You've had an interesting couple of days. I think you've been in Hiroshima, have you?
I was there on Saturday. So I went, got the bullet train up there. Obviously, no press on Saturday. Had a kind of a day off, and then kind of sports journalists.
You do days off, do you?
Apparently so. But the sports journalist, the hardworking man that I am, came back on the train to Hiroshima because I saw that the local team, Sanfreece Hiroshima, were in action, but they weren't in action against any other J-League team. They were in action against Vissel Kobe, a team that I've been meaning to see while I've been here, but I've missed them all the time.
Oh, wow.
I've missed them when they were in Kobe. This is the most interesting team in all of Japan, Vissel Kobe, because they've got Andrew Iniesta, they've got David Villa, they've got Lucas Podolski, and they've got Thomas Vermaelen. Iniesta, Villa and Vermaelen were all playing on Saturday afternoon, but they got crushed by Hiroshima. 6-2 was the final score. Granted, they did have a man sent off Kobe, which allowed the home side to kind of race through a couple of late goals. But they weren't great in fairness, Kobe. They haven't had an amazing season. They've got money from Rakuten, who you might recognise from the front of the Barcelona jersey. They're trying to be funded in a similar manner, play football in a similar manner, so that they can become the Barcelona of Asia. That isn't going to plan so far, and certainly Saturday's result was desperately disappointing. 6-2 against a team that don't exactly have any European superstars, but maybe that's the whole point. Maybe the fact that this team is based more on homegrown talent, more Asian talent, people who are actually up and coming in their careers, rather than people like Villa and Iniesta, who perhaps are a bit past it at this stage. Villa in particular didn't look amazing, although Iniesta is Iniesta. But the more I watched it on Saturday, the more I appreciated the gifts of Sergio Busquets and Xavi, put it that way. Did
you get into the mix zone afterwards, get a few interviews?
No, I didn't. I went to the Peace Park afterwards, Johnny. My historical side took over then. I was like, I'm not hanging around the stadium too long. Yeah. Also, couldn't get accredited. That's probably the main reason. But right. I'll put it down to history reasons. Went to the Peace Park to see the atomic bomb dome and all that sort of stuff. It was past sunset by the time I got in there after the game, but it was still worth seeing. A very valuable visit for any Irish person who's in this area and who has a JR rail pass. It's only about an hour and a half of a journey from Fukuoka, where I am now. And the Peace Park is pretty sensational, really. That atomic bomb dome is an initial structure that was there in 1945 that they've managed to preserve and keep down through the decades. Kind of a memory of what happened on the 6th of August that year.
Yeah, that must have been quite astonishing, really. And just we see the image there. This life after the disaster that befell the place. In terms of the press conference this morning, talking of weather and this potential typhoon, and was probably one of the main narratives. But what did you take from it? We got plenty of it earlier on in all its glory.
Yeah, well, let's actually start with the typhoon, Johnny, because it's the information we've been getting is kind of away from the press conferences. So this is Typhoon Hagibis, which is about to hit Tokyo, or which is about to hit Japan over the next couple of days and make landfall, we suspect, around Saturday. So we've moved down to the southern island of Kyushu here, and Honshu is where it's going to get worse affected by looking at the map. So that'll be the likes of Kobe that'll get it bad. But here in Fukuoka, it looks like it's going to get it bad as well, to the point where it could be upgraded to super typhoon level. So I don't like the sound of that. It's been described as fierce already. And there were question marks around games and whether or not they would go ahead at the start of the tournament. And indeed, here last week, France versus USA was under threat, although it managed to survive. The typhoon wasn't as bad as first feared at the end of it. If this thing hits at the weekend, though, the Ireland game is in serious jeopardy, the Ireland versus Samoa game. And what will happen if the game gets cancelled? It'll mean that it is put down as a 0-0 draw, which is obviously disaster for Ireland, because that would allow Scotland to perhaps beat Japan and they take the first two spots and Ireland finish third. But you'd imagine World Rugby are not going to let this happen. And there has been some suggestion that they would think about actually moving the day of the game to ensure that this does not happen. Rather than location, this could be pushed back to Sunday. If this does hit the land on Saturday and it is as bad as some people fear, it does reach super typhoon level. Like, it's an area here, Johnny, that gets a lot of typhoons. This would be the worst that Japan have seen in all of 2019, according to some sources. did a bit of reading while I was waiting for you there in terms of like the historical typhoons that this place have got. Way back, if you go centuries and centuries back, Johnny, when the Mongols were in their pomp and you had the invasion here in Japan, they made their way through most of Kyushu Island before getting to Fukuoka, and Genghis Khan and his crew got scuppered by this terrible typhoon and didn't actually manage to invade Fukuoka in the final place. And this became known as obviously the winds that became known in Japanese terms as kamikaze, divine wind. That's where the term came from, right here in Fukuoka.
Can I just come across you there? You know, obviously we're both in sports journalism, but is this a trip that has kind of reaffirmed that you're basically you're in the wrong game here? I mean, you've so many strings to your bow.
I appreciate the true integrity of your tone there, Johnny. I really, really do. Once you've got 5 minutes waiting for the call from OTB, you tend to read a lot of Wikipedia, Johnny, and it tends to inform my substance. I thought it's amazing. It would be perfect if Ireland managed to play a very loose and unplanned game, and therefore you could make a comparison describing Joe Schmidt's rugby as kamikaze, but it's anything but kamikaze, unfortunately. So the weather might be, and that could put a huge dent, as in it could completely end Ireland's World Cup hopes this weekend.
That's a hell of a dent.
Let's not get away from that fact, but you'd like to think that because of the magnitude of the game, the forces that be, the powers that be, say, listen, we are moving this game either geographically or when it comes to a day. And I know people will have hotels booked and flights booked. I've got a flight booked myself for Sunday morning, but the actual integrity of the competition is probably paramount to all of that.
It is, and you're obviously bringing in magnitude and such words as well, keeping with the weather theme. You wouldn't actually mention that to Joe in a subsequent press conference that it would actually suit my match report were you to play some kamikaze rugby. Are you that close with Joe?
I'm not sure he said it to be okay with me. Greg Feek has had a small pop off me once or twice here, and some eagle-eyed viewer managed to spot Andy Farrell kind of whispering things when I've asked questions here or there, but Joe seems to be okay with me. In fact, I'd say there's a growing respect between Joe Schmidt and I, namely because he never would have answered a question for me before these last couple of weeks, so it has to be growing, right?
So yeah, it's starting from a fairly low base.
Exactly.
What did you make of Andy Farrell today, the guy who may or may not have an issue with you, but he was putting a positive spin on things, wasn't he?
He was. To be fair, when you're talking to Andy Farrell, I mean, when it comes to his remit over the past couple of games, it's been largely positive. Like, obviously, conceding 3 points between the Scotland and Russia games was impressive. But I think genuinely when it came to the Japan game, when people doffed their cap at Japan, it was how they did offensively. And when you kind of criticised Ireland, it was how they did offensively. And Ireland's defence hasn't really come in for much criticism. Like, it came in for huge criticism, and deservedly so, after the game in Twickenham in the build-up to the World Cup after all those missed tackles. But it seems that in terms of Andy Farrell's role, he's definitely turned the tide, and it seems that the tide is going in the right way. He was talking about the intensity of the training session this morning. Gary Ringrose is talking about the intensity of the training session this morning. And it seems that there is a realisation now, not that they needed any realisation, that this is where it starts to matter. This is possibly the most important 2 weeks in the careers of a lot of these Irish rugby players, because if this 2 weeks ends with a win in the World Cup quarter-final, it will be a historic result in the context of what Ireland have done and have failed to do, most importantly, in previous World Cups. So I think there's an acute realisation that it's time to really perk up now. Forget peaking. This is where you need to start peaking, and they probably will need to put in a big performance against Samoa at the weekend to ensure they come away with the 5 points. You had Jordy Murphy also speaking this morning, Johnny. He's fit and raring to go. He'll be back in full training on Thursday, which is usually too late to make a Joe Schmidt team in any given week, so I suspect him to not be in the matchday squad this weekend. But everybody else looks good to go. By all accounts, Robbie Henshaw is going well. Joey Carberry is going extremely well, and you might actually see Henshaw now involved in this weekend squad. Carberry should almost certainly be involved in this week's weekend squad by the sounds of things. So things are starting to look a little bit better on the injury front from an Irish perspective. Jordy Murphy, really the only person at the moment you will say is going to be ruled out from this weekend squad as a result of the injury. But he's on the mend, and should he make a quarter-final, it looks like he will have a full week's training for that.
I can only conclude by asking what you're up to for the rest of the day.
Well, I suppose it's 5:10 at the moment, Johnny. Might need to put into the bank another one of these food reviews. So I'm going to have a look around Fukuoka here to actually see what's going on in terms of the cuisine scene. Was obviously on trains and stuff, looking around the area as a whole rather than the city over the course of the weekend. So haven't got a proper chance to explore Fukuoka just yet, but I'm going to go and do that now. And maybe, just maybe, there might be another food review on the way this evening.
Yeah, you can imagine it's like the outed food critic who people know in advance, like when he arrives at the restaurant, oh, we have to up our game here, Eoin Sheahan is here.
Exactly, I've been getting those looks left, right and centre here. Looks of fear, mostly.
Yeah, I'm not sure that was anything to do with your culinary stuff.
Well, it's a good feeling to be able to put the fear of God into the eyes of people, because I've never had that experience until now, Johnny, but it sure is a good feeling. It's a feeling of testosterone coursing all through your body, really.
Absolutely. After a weekend in your beloved Kerry, I had a bit of the fear of God yesterday, but it's all good again. Thanks a million, Eoin.
Oh, how was it? How was Kerry?
I can't but fall further and further in love with your home county, I have to say.
Well, I missed them all, and thank you very much for being the messenger down there.
That's lovely. Thanks, Eoin.
Cheers, Johnny.